Greetings Guzzlers, we're doing a little morning baking session, hence the reason it's got coffee. Now, some of you may, well you might still, but I remember from younger days, I can't remember that far back, having a vanilla slice, and quite often, I mean, still see vanilla slices in the shops, don't tend to buy them, but they come in a variety of names: vanilla slice, custard slice. Actually, I'll tell you some really interesting or revolting ones later, but it's actually a French word, mille-feuille. So we're going to make a traditional or semi-traditional mille-feuille. Now, I say semi-traditional because we're going to be adding some strawberry jam to this one. The original, well, I say original, traditionally it would just be like a custard, but there are variations on it, including ones with jam, and that's what we're going to make it. We're going to make a strawberry jam mille-feuille, courtesy of the Hairy Bikers. So we're going to need to make our pastry, our puff pastry, and I've got a 500 gram block of puff pastry there. It's sticky, hence the reason I've dusted my rolling pin in icing sugar, and I've cut a rectangle that fits into one of my large baking sheets. It's about 25 by almost 40 or something, and I've also dusted that over the baking sheet with some icing sugar. And so what we're going to do is we're now just going to roll this out, and we want it to be as large as that baking sheet. It needs to obviously fit into the tray. It will shrink a little bit, but obviously because it's got a lip on this tray, I've just got to make it so it will fit in that tray. So I'm just now going to just get that rolled. I've got that rolled out. To be honest, I haven't gone quite all the way to the edges in some cases, but that can't be out. We would obviously be trimming this, and we'll be cutting this into 3 slices once it's cooked, because that is the traditional mille-feuille. It's 3 slices, rectangular slices of puff pastry. So I'm now just going to dust this over with some more icing sugar, and then because although this is puff pastry, hence the reason mille-feuille, which is meant to be like 1,000 layers or 1,000 sleeves, 1,000 leaves, which there won't be. I'll tell you why in a minute. But we want it to puff up slightly, but not, you know, like you would perhaps get with like a pastry lid. So we're going to make sure we prick it well all over, and then what I've got is another sheet of greaseproof, and that greaseproof paper or baking paper or whatever you want to call it, I'm just going to lay on top, just as another way of helping it stop sticking, because I'm then going to lay an identical tray on top, and that will help prevent it rising too much. Now I've got my oven coming up to about 210, and we're then going to bake that in there essentially until it's all cooked. Could be about 25 to 30 minutes, so it's cooked and starting to go a nice sort of golden brown. Okay, like I say, it will shrink a little bit, but we'll worry about that afterwards. So I'm going to get that baking, clear up the mess where I was doing my rolling, and then we're going to make the next ingredient. Like I said to you, it's puff pastry, 3 layers of puff pastry, and traditionally it has, between the 2 of the layers, Creme Patissiere, which is a sort of custard. Okay, so to prepare that custard, we're going to need 4 egg yolks, and get that last bit of egg yolk out of there. And I've also got here some caster sugar, and I'm adding 75 grams of caster sugar. Now what we're going to do, now you could use an electric beater if you want, okay, but we just want to beat these together to nice and pale and creamy. So I've told you about the alternative names for the mille-feuille. Traditionally we perhaps knew it more growing up as a vanilla slice. Some people refer to it as a custard slice, because obviously it's got this custard in it. Some people refer to it as a Napoleon. However, that isn't necessarily what a Napoleon cake actually was. Although I don't really know the true origins of the mille-feuille, it certainly existed in some form or other in cookbooks going back to the 16th century. So it's a dish that has been around quite a long time. So I've got that looking nice and pale now. So our next stage is to start preparing the milk. 250 mils of semi-skim milk. Okay, you can use whole milk if you prefer. Now if you've got a vanilla pod, which I thought I had and I couldn't find, you can add, scrape out the beans as such, you know, inside of the bean, and add that to the milk. I haven't. I've got some Madagascan vanilla paste, although to be honest I'd hardly call it a paste. Just going to add some of that to the milk, and then what we're going to do is we're now just going to put it on. Oops, not got that. We're just going to put that onto a low heat and heat that gently until it comes to a simmer. Now obviously you've got to be careful with milk because it will boil over very quickly. So our mille-feuille, I told you that it's been around a long time. There is even a speculation that because it's a layer, that this may actually be a precursor to what we think of as today a layer cake, but whether that's true or not we don't know. The actual name mille-feuille is in a English cookbook written by a French chef, where he refers to a mille-feuille. That was 1733. So that's the first documented mille-feuille name. By the 18th century, or in the 18th century, a mille-feuille was more traditionally filled with jam and marmalade rather than cream. Okay. By cream, I mean the Creme Patissiere, the custard cream, if you like. We're still waiting on that to come up temperature. And while we're waiting, I've got here 10 grams of plain flour, and I've got 10 grams of corn flour, whoops, which I'm just going to add to our egg and sugar mix, and I'm just going to whisk that in while we're waiting on that milk. So, I said to you about the name mille-feuille 1733. The only other record, or the next sort of time that name is mentioned, isn't until much later in the 18th century. By the 19th century, they're beginning to refer to it as filled with jam. Okay, however, it was 1876 when there was a reference to it being filled with Bavarian cream. So nowadays you will find mille-feuille, like I say, whole variety of sort of variations on the filling, variations on the topping. We're going to perhaps make one of the more traditional toppings, which is like an icing sugar topping, but it has been cream. Some people put strawberries inside it and on top for decoration and so on. So really we're just waiting at the moment on that milk. Now, I've got some jam. You can use ordinary strawberry jam, shop bought jam. This is some jam I made earlier. Well, I say earlier, I made yesterday. And also we're going to need some double cream, some lemon juice, some icing sugar for the topping, and some cocoa powder, because quite often traditionally you'll see the vanilla slice in England and that with like a plain white icing top, but with sort of streaks, if you like, of chocolate. So it's not actual real chocolate, this is just chocolate coloured icing. Our milk has just come up to a simmer, so I'll turn the heat off, and what we're going to do is we're just gradually, whoops, spilt milk, we're just going to gradually whisk that in. And then it will be going back into that pan where we're then going to cook it through for about 8 to 10 minutes on a low heat, but we will need to constantly stir that then. Okay, so I'm just going to get all that blended in. I've now returned that to the pan, and we're now just going to cook this through, so like I say, up to about 10 minutes. We want it effectively to be nice and smooth, but obviously very thick. And we mean thick, okay? The other thing is, because obviously we've put flour in there, particularly corn flour, we need to make sure we cook out all that flavour, otherwise it'll end up tasting floury. So, we've got our pastry still cooking, okay, and we're just preparing our final stage of our Creme Patissiere. When this is done, we'll be chucking it back into that bowl, or you can put it into a fresh bowl if you like, and we're just going to cover it over with cling film, and we'll be making sure it doesn't skin over, and then we just need to let it cool for up to an hour. So, which point we'll have prepared our pastry slices, but everything else is just wait until this is cool enough to start adding. That's had its sort of 10ish minutes. It's got nice and thick. You need to be careful, it goes thick very quickly. And all I'm going to do now is, like I say, I'm going to put some cling film over the top, but I want to press the cling film down so that it's in contact with the surface, and that way it will stop a skin forming. Now we will be adding some double cream to that, but for now that just starts to go to one side and cool for about an hour. Right, my pastry is cooked. I've had a little look and it's gone a browny colour, which, oh, excuse me, we're just going to leave this for 5 minutes with the lid on, as it were, just to cool a little bit, and then we'll be taking the lid off, the top off, and we're going to start trimming it. Okay, we're going to trim it while it's warm. You will need a very sharp knife, but we'll worry about that once those 5 minutes up. So I said to you that it's sometimes known as Napoleon. Traditionally in France, the Napoleon cake or dessert is slightly different, and it's generally filled with frangipane. Okay, although in England we do still quite often, apparently, I've never heard of it, but we call it a Napoleon. So Napoleon, custard slice, vanilla slice, mille-feuille. Although often in the UK when you buy them, you'll find it's actually only 2 layers of puff pastry. France, it's sometimes known as the gâteau de mille-feuille, i.e. the cake of 1,000 sheets. And I said to you, actually, with the way that shop bought puff pastry is made, usually, given the way it's folded, it'll be 729 layers. However, there are some modern versions of it with 2048. So either way, it's not 1,000. And I did say to you, there was one quite revolting, or there's some revolting names, mainly because of that. So in some countries, like South Africa, England, you know, we give them nice names like custard tarts. Unfortunately in Australia, they name it as the custard slice or the vanilla slice, but they often refer to it as a snot block or a puss pie. So not very appetising, is it? So that really tells you a little bit, well, that's really all the history of it. So we're just going to let that cool and then we'll get ready to trim it. So I've trimmed the edges, and given that obviously I didn't make it, that one end was a bit funny, I've had to make it a little bit shorter. But essentially it splits into 3-inch slices, and all I'm going to do now is that we're just going to put these to one side and we let them thoroughly cool. Obviously we're waiting on the custard, the Creme Patissiere, so it's going to take a little while. But here are our 3 puff pastry slices ready to start assembling. So everything's nice and cool now. Pastry's cool, the custard's pretty cool. So what I've got in here is 150 mils of double cream. Now all we're going to do is we're just going to lightly whip this up until it's starting to form some soft peaks. So there we go. Be careful you don't go too far with that, because you don't want to turn that into butter. Now we're just going to loosen up our custard, and what I'm going to do now is gradually fold this into that whipped cream, and at which point I've got my jam out ready. We'll be ready now, once I've folded this in, to start assembling it. Now like I said, we still need to get the icing done, but we want to assemble the layers first. So I'm just going to get this all neatly mixed together and then we'll start assembling. So on our bottom sheet, I'm just going to put some jam. In fact, I'm going to put jam on the bottom and the middle sheet. We don't want to go all the way to the edges with the jam. Okay, so what we will do is just use a palette knife to spread it and just leave a little bit of a gap at the ends and the edges. Okay, I might just add a little bit more to that one. So like I say, I'm going to repeat that with the second slice. The third slice, obviously, that's going to have the icing on. So I've put my bottom slice onto a plate, and all I'm going to do now is I'm now just going to add some of that custard, and then we'll just use a palette knife to spread it over the top. Now this can go all the way to the edges, and it doesn't matter if it oozes out the side. Whoops, got some on the slice, but that won't matter, you'll see why in a bit. And then I'm going to lift our next one on and put that neatly on top, and then I'm just going to spread more of the custard on top of that one. So finally I take the other slice and I actually turn that one over, so it didn't matter I've got a bit of custard on that, because that side's flatter. So I'm just going to lightly press that together. So obviously at the moment it's not finished off and it's perhaps looking a little bit messy down the sides, but we can trim all that up, whoops, later. But there we go, we've got our 3 layers. I'm just going to give that a little bit of a clean up, and then we'll get on with the icing on the top. Now we're going to prepare the icing. So in this bowl I've got 200 grams of icing sugar, and in this one I've got 25. I've also got here some cocoa powder, 5 grams, and I'm going to put that in to the smaller bowl, because this is going to make our little chocolate streaks, if you like. Now I'll put that to one side, we'll concentrate on the white one. I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. And then I'm going to mix that in, and I may need to add, probably definitely will need to add a tablespoon of water. But essentially I want this to be runny enough that we can spread it easily over the top. Now in the meantime, by the way, the mille-feuille's disappeared because I put it into the fridge to chill down. So I'm just going to add some water to that. Like I say, I'm going to use a tablespoon at a time until I've got a nice runny consistency. Can't speak now. So that's my white icing done. Okay. I'm now going to do the same with this, but I want this a little bit thicker. Okay. That might want to be a little bit runnier, but this wants to be a little bit thicker because we're going to pipe this. So I've got a piping bag ready. Okay, I'm not having a nozzle. What I'm going to do is just snip the end off, but you'll see that when we come to it. So now I'm just going to get this mixed. I'm going to take my icing, and we want to make sure we've got a nice even coat over the whole of that slice. Now when we come to spread it, we might find that it will be beneficial to hold it as we do it, because it will obviously slide about on those custard layers. So we just want to get a nice even coat over the top, and then we'll be ready for our final decoration. So what I'm going to do now is, using that chocolate icing, I'm going to pipe, although these are a bit wavy, pipe some lines, about 4 lines along the length and I'll go for 6. So that first one's a bit wonky. Just going to add one final one down that edge. And now, taking a cocktail stick, I'm just going to drag across the top, and in fact I'm going to alternate the direction. You can do them all in one direction, you could do them diagonally, but there you then have what in England would be our classic vanilla slice. Obviously it needs cutting up, but before we do that, because it's still obviously quite wobbly, we're now going to put that in the fridge, ideally overnight, but probably at least for 4 hours, to get that to set, get the icing to set, get the custard to firm up a bit, and then that should make about 6 slices. So I can't slice it at the moment, it's way too wet, so we'll put that into the fridge and let it set.